Doing what's being the left, I see.
The camera's off on the right.
Good morning, everybody. We're here to talk about the open borders policy of the Biden administration and what sort of damage that has caused to Americans no matter where you live, not just along the border region. In particular, I want to emphasize the concerns I have, and I think average Americans would also have, about the 300,000 children who've been placed with sponsors by the Biden administration's HHS, Health and Human Services, or Office of Refugee Relocation. The New York Times did an investigative piece recently, a couple of them actually, documenting forced labor among some of those children who have been placed with sponsors. But one of the most shocking statistics that was revealed in those stories, that of the 300,000 children who've been placed with sponsors in the United States, not necessarily relatives, could be a parent, could be a distant relative, but could just be a foster home, that in 85,000 of those placements, the 30-day wellness call that is typically made by the administration went unanswered. And so not only does the Biden administration not know where 300,000 children currently reside, what's happening to them, whether they're going to school, whether they're getting health care, or whether they're being recruited for gangs, whether they're being trafficked for sex, or just simply neglected or abused, the Biden administration doesn't know. And the truth is they don't care. Because if they did know, they would do something about it. But they refuse to do so, even though, as the New York Times documented, high-level officials like Marty Walsh, the former Secretary of Labor, Susan Rice, former domestic policy advisor, among others, were told about what was going on and yet refused to do anything about it. You know, I've wondered as a border state senator, what's it going to take to get the attention of the Biden administration to finally do something about the Biden border crisis? Well, obviously 300,000 children who are in the United States that they don't know what they are or what's happening to them, what their circumstances are. That's not enough to move them. How about 108,000 dead Americans? Dead because they consumed some of the drugs that are smuggled across the southwestern border, including 71,000 from fentanyl. I've gone to high schools, I'm sure my colleagues have too, and grieved with the parents and school officials over kids who thought they were taking a Xanax or a Percocet, but in fact were taking a counterfeit pill laced with fentanyl, enough to kill them. I still wear a wrist bracelet from one I got in Carrollton Farmers Branch, where a father gave me a bracelet that commemorates his daughter who lost her own life as a result of the fentanyl poisoning, and it says, "One pill can kill," trying to raise public awareness to this scourge. So if 300,000 lost children won't get the Biden administration attention, how about 108,000 dead Americans? Well, apparently that's not even enough to move them. Finally, let me just say, even the Attorney General of the United States acknowledged that the mass migration of individuals across the border was really part of a larger game plan. First of all, it makes these transnational criminal organizations, the cartels, rich. But secondly, by diverting Border Patrol, taking them off the front lines so they can attend to administrative duties like feeding these unaccompanied children, changing diapers and the like, that's created a huge opportunity for the drugs to come across, which again contributed to the death of 108,000 Americans last year. So we're here today to ask, what will it take? What will it take to finally get the Biden administration to wake up to their failed open border policies? And how many more people need to die? How many more children need to be lost before the Biden administration finally agrees to work with us on a bipartisan basis to address this problem? Senator Langford.
Senator Corden, thanks for your leadership on this, that you have been at this and at this and at this, to be able to focus in on the country on what we're going to do on the border crisis. It's interesting that the numbers can run up to 10,000 a day, and then they drop back to 3,000 to 5,000 a day, and the Biden administration says, look, the numbers are way down, and it seems that the national media just looks away. They just take the cue from the Biden administration, don't pay attention to this anymore. Everything's just fine. Don't stare at the 3,000 to 5,000 people still coming across the border, still being released, into the unaccompanied minors that are still being released out into the countries that the Biden administration has no idea where they are. We have multitudes of challenges here. The population crossing the border right now is a different population than what we saw even last year. Fewer people that are Spanish speakers. The cartels are advertising worldwide and are drawing more and more people in from Pakistan, from Russia, from China, from West Africa, from areas outside of Central America. We're seeing folks that are coming in. The vast numbers of those are men in their 20s and 30s. We saw this at 9/11, where the country was not focused in on individuals that were illegally present in the country, and a small handful of people that were not legally present in the country caused a major national security loss for us, and 3,000 Americans die. Listen, this is a national security issue because we have more and more people that are crossing the border that are not from our region, that are literally come from all over the world, facilitated by the cartels. We have more and more children that are in our country that this administration has no idea where they are, and we have more and more operations from the cartels where they're pushing across asylum seekers at one point, then 3 miles down the river, pushing people in with backpacks and camo to be able to bring in who knows what. This is an ongoing issue, and for whatever reason, the media has chosen to look away and just pretend this problem is solved because the Biden administration has released the numbers are down, when the numbers are 3 times higher than what they were during the Obama administration, and we still have a record low number of deportations while we have a record high number of people illegally crossing the border. All we're trying to do is to be able to get the administration to do their job. They have a basic requirement to be able to enforce the law. Our simple statement is follow the law, enforce the law, follow through on that. We're glad to be able to partner with them on ways to be able to fix the asylum process. There's lots of things that have got to legislatively be done. But right now they have the obligation to follow the law and enforce the law.
I just want to thank my colleagues for highlighting a very, very dark issue. And at the end of the day, Biden is simply derelict in his duty. We've seen over 300,000 unaccompanied minors. They flooded the border. 85,000 of those children have been reported missing. I just want to reiterate that number. 85,000 of those children are reported missing. We hear reports of child labor, cruel working conditions, abuse, and untold other horrors. And here's from Joe Biden back in 2018, soon to be a candidate at that point. He said, a policy that separates young children from their parents, it isn't a deterrent, it's unconscionable. He also said, a policy that traumatizes children isn't a bargaining chip, it's abhorrent. Remember, these are the words of Joe Biden. It's simply put that his open border policy is exactly what he said that it shouldn't be. It's unconscionable and it's abhorrent. Friends, strong nations shouldn't have weak borders. Strong nations don't allow tens of thousands of children to be lost and to be abused. So for the sake of these children, and for the sake of our national credibility, we need this administration to change course.
So let's go through the numbers since the Biden administration took office. In the year prior, in 2020, less than 500,000 people came across the border illegally. Less than 500,000. In the first year of the Biden administration, 2021, 1.7 million. 1.7 million. In 2022, 2.4 million. 2.4 million people that year alone. This year, almost up to 1.8 million in about 9 months. So on track to do another 2.4 million. That's about 6.5 million people that have come across the border illegally so far during the Biden administration. And that just counts the ones that we know of, the gotaways and so forth. Add those in as well. And it's not just the southern border now. You're seeing the same thing on the northern border as well. I'm from a state on the northern border. The first year, less than 30,000 came across. First year of the Biden administration. Now it's over 130,000 so far this year, just in 9 months. And I talked to the sheriffs up there and other law enforcement that's trying to make up for the fact that, you know, this increased flow of people coming across illegally, the drugs, human trafficking, and they're trying. Our sheriffs, our law enforcement, they're trying to keep up. But of course, they've got the same problem that we've seen in much larger proportions on the southern border. It's not just people coming across illegally. As Senator Cornyn said, people being human trafficked, more than 100,000 deaths from drugs, fentanyl, and other illegal drugs that are being brought in. That's the toll that our people are paying across this country. Every state is affected by this Biden open border policy. And the solution is obvious. We know what the solution is. Secure the border. Enforce the law. We're not guessing on this. We saw it during the prior administration. Complete the wall and enforce the policies that will stop this draw of people coming, meaning the Remain in Mexico protocols and the third safe country protocols. We've seen it work. And it's something that's affecting people all across this country, as I said, in every state. People need to demand that the Biden administration enforce the law. Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary Mayorkas, needs to start putting the true facts out there, what's really going on. What's really going on. And quit saying he's enforcing the border as 6.5 million people come across illegally. The drugs, the human trafficking. But Americans need to demand that the Biden administration enforce the law, because border security is national security.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming here. Senator Cornyn asked, what can we do to get the Biden administration's attention on this? It starts with getting the media's attention to this awful, awful problem. This is a chart that I started developing as Chairman of Homeland Security, and way down on the left-hand side of that chart, that was the humanitarian crisis that President Obama declared when we were apprehending about 2,000 people a day. His Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, said it was a really bad day for Border Patrol when they encountered or apprehended 1,000 people a day. As Senator Langford said, we've hit days of 10,000. And the Obama humanitarian crisis just looks like a little bump in comparison to what is happening now under Joe Biden. We don't talk enough about what humanitarian depredations are occurring because of this illegal flow. Senator Hoeven talked about the numbers. He's talking about encounters. We don't even call them apprehensions anymore. Now we encounter, we process, and we disperse. Some are returned, but in total, DHS not being particularly transparent about this, but we are approaching about 5 million people during the Biden administration that have come to this country illegally, been encountered, processed, and dispersed, or come in as a known or unknown getaway. Almost 5 million people. Half the states have a population less than 5 million people. That is the magnitude of the problem. As Chairman of Homeland Security, we held something like 30 hearings on this problem. We talked about the human depredations. We talked about how children being sold for $81 to create family units to exploit our asylum laws. We heard testimony of a little 3-year-old boy just left to die in a field, basically, with a phone number written on his shoe. That's what happens after they've been used. They just get abandoned. Or even worse, they get put into human or sex slavery. And we're not talking about that enough. We're not talking about the human depredations result of President Biden's open border policy. His open border policy is facilitating the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet. Back in the envelope calculation last time I was at the border, figures about $18 billion we're funneling into the human traffickers, into the sex traffickers, and the drug traffickers. I was recently on a Zoom call with Tim Ballard talking about the Sound of Freedom movie that is doing well at the box office. So over $100 million so far collected. What's happening on the left is they're vilifying that movie. The media, mainstream media, is ignoring it. When the story, the tale that that movie is telling ought to be highlighted. Sex trafficking little children. Where do you think the 85,000 children that they've lost track of, what do you think they're doing? How do you think the young women pay off their $5,000 to $15,000 human trafficking fee? It's in the sex trade. It's in human trafficking. It's other forms of involuntary servitude. The American people need to be told the story by the mainstream media so that the public will put pressure on the Biden administration to stop this, to end this. Now, next Tuesday, I'm very pleased that Speaker McCarthy is hosting a viewing of The Sound of Freedom Tuesday night. I'm certainly going to go. I hope if you don't have an opportunity to go to that, I hope you go to a theater and hear that story and then tell that tale. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more with Senator Johnson. Here we are, Senate Republicans, standing here again talking about the very same topic. The toll that the Biden border crisis is taking, not only on Americans, but the migrants that are being used and abused to further someone else's call. Make no mistake, this is both a national security and a humanitarian crisis. Now, I have been to the border. I went 3 times in the first 2 months in office because I wanted the real, unvarnished truth. I asked them, tell me even what you think I don't want to hear. I want to know the full set of facts. And one fact is that our courageous Border Patrol agents, ICE, National Guard, local law enforcement are doing every single thing possible to make sure that Americans maintain their safety and that they help end this crisis. But the bottom line is they're overextended and they're under-resourced. What has stuck with me the most are the stories that I heard when I was down there. I saw a little baby, 6 months old, shivering and wet from just getting pulled out of the river with her parents. I saw a little pair of shoes, y'all, just on the ground next to the riverbank. That little pair of shoes has a story. But we need you to help us tell that story. I looked in the eyes of a CBP agent when he said that one of the hardest days he's ever had in his entire life was pulling the lifeless body of a woman from the Rio Grande who was pregnant with twins. Folks, this is having real implications on real people. And the only people that are benefiting from Joe Biden's failed policies, not Americans, it's not these migrants. Just as Senator Johnson said, it is essentially terrorists and drug cartels that are making bank and getting their way. We need the American people to stand up and stand with us and say enough is enough. When you think about these 300 unaccompanied children that have come across the border, let me tell you something, I'm a mama. Do you think I'm going to let my child wander in hopes that someone finds them on the other side of the border? Absolutely not. I have talked to these young women, and it wasn't that they were raped every day. It was how many times a day they were raped. Folks, this has real implications. You look at the real stories of a 13-year-old boy who's being sent to be a day laborer all day long. He's not living the American dream. He's paying back what his parents owe or he promised to a drug cartel. None of these policies that the Biden administration is putting forth are humanitarian in any way, shape, or form. Senator Johnson said it, but under President Obama, his Secretary of Homeland Security, said if we reach 1,000 migrants coming to our border a day, that's a disaster. It's a crisis. Well, you all saw when I had Secretary Mayorkas in front of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, he wouldn't even call what we have today a crisis. Apparently, Senator Langford said it earlier, but we have hit over 10,000 encounters a day at our border. Just yesterday, 6,100. Folks, we don't know who some of these people are that are even getting away. Think about the unknown terrorists that are coming into our communities. You think about the child traffickers, and you think about the fentanyl that we are seeing just dive into even our classrooms and our schools. We must do more. We must stand up and tell the drug cartels that the American dream is not for sale. Because the people that are paying the price are these kids. But if you all don't decide to tell this side of the story, the real side of the story, they are the ones that are going to pay. I can promise you that. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Texas Governor Abbott has responded to the situation with different efforts to address the border with buoys. Razor wire, the Justice Department says they're now assessing that. I know you've defended those measures before, so they're desperate measures, called more desperate times. Any change in your thinking on this, given the email we saw this week with the state trooper talking about migrants being pushed back into the Rio Grande and other practices that critics say are ignorant?
Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation if President Biden and the Department of Homeland Security were doing its job. I think several senators have made the point that rather than securing the border, what the Biden administration's approach is to process migrants across the border and into the interior of the United States to never be heard from again. Some of them are asylum seekers, but more recently, just in order to make the numbers look better than they really are, they've been releasing people who aren't even claiming asylum into the United States for a 2-year period of time and giving them work permits. You know, we learned a lot about the pull factors and the push factors. We all understand the push factors, poverty, violence, things like that. But there's also factors where it's tantamount to laying out the welcome mat and saying anybody and everybody who wants to come here is welcome to come here. Unfortunately, as we've heard, all of this happens not through legal immigration channels, but through illegal immigration channels and enriching some of the worst people in the world, truly evil, as Senator Johnson said. So some of the tactics that are being used at the border are desperation tactics because, frankly, the Biden administration is not doing its job. Texas, as you know, has a 1,200-mile common border with Mexico, so we bear the brunt of this. But it doesn't stop there. Certainly the drugs and the migrants don't just stay there. They extend throughout the rest of the country. So, you know, this reminds me a little bit of the incident where remember when there was an allegation that the horse-mounted Border Patrol agent had used the reins on his horse to whip a migrant, and there was outrage claimed? Well, it turns out that's not true at all. And in fact, that didn't occur, but you never hear the truth from the Biden administration. They want to vilify the very people that Senator Britt was talking about who are doing an incredible job along the border. But it's a thankless task and ones where they know the administration does not have their back. So I'm glad Governor Abbott's willing to take the measures that he thinks is necessary, but because the federal government is not doing its job. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Kling. Are Senate Republicans willing to use the appropriations process to, excuse me, as leverage to put forth measures to secure the border, such as having a border wall?
Senator Britt happens to be the appropriations chair or ranker of that.
Yeah, so one thing that we saw immediately from this administration is the lack of seriousness that they have when it comes to actually fixing this crisis. So you have President Biden put out his budget, and while he increased a number of things in his budget, Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security, which is actually the department that is about keeping Americans safe, was the only department to receive an actual cut of 1%. I was very disheartened to see what Senate Democrats put forth, and in the appropriations process, ultimately giving Our Homeland Security bill, about a 6.2% cut over here across the board. In order to be able to do what we need to do, we are definitely going to have to push. We are definitely going to have to speak up. We look at the bill in front of us. We know that we are in the minority, but we are certainly in conversations to make this the very best bill possible. Is it a bill that I would write if I were in charge? Likely not. But we are working time and time again to make sure that we get critical components to actually secure the border. I am not interested in border management. I am interested in border security. This crisis is not only one for Americans, but these migrants are paying the price as well. We've got to make sure that people understand in this nation that we're not going to reward you for lawlessness. But that's exactly what Biden and his failed policies are trying to do. So we're working diligently to get the best bill possible under, obviously, the current constraints that we have on this side of the hill.
But is it a red line?
I want to make 2 points. I'm on appropriations as well. I want to make 2 points in that regard. Number one, the funding issue, the Biden administration has funding to build the border barrier, to build the wall, and they won't use it. They won't use the funds because they won't enforce the law, because they want an open border policy. What has to happen is, I think that media, the public, everybody has to say to the Biden administration, will you acknowledge that the cartels are bringing people across illegally? And I'd like to hear their answer. Are they going to say yes or no? Because if they say, well, yes, obviously the cartels are bringing people across, then the next question is, why are you enabling these international criminal networks? Why are you, in essence, making them very, very wealthy and very, very powerful and having them set up in our country? Why are you doing that? Why are you following a policy that allows that? And as far as the funding, why are you not using the funding that you have right now to stop it, in addition to implementing the policies like the Remain in Mexico and Third Safe Country policies that would stop it?
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Britt, you touched on this a little bit, but your points about the Biden administration are well taken. At the end of the day, though, a lot of this onus is on Congress. There hasn't been a comprehensive immigration reform bill in nearly 4 decades. So what bipartisan conversations, real concrete conversations, are being had, if any, to show the American people this is more than just messaging?
Well, let me turn it over to Senator Britt to respond to your question. But I introduced about 2 years ago the Bipartisan Border Security Act with the Senator Sinema, bipartisan bill in the House, Henry Cuellar and Tony Gonzalez, thinking that if things got so bad that the Biden administration was feeling such heat from its failed policies, they might be looking for a lifeline. But we got no response. They don't care. I mean, like I said, we haven't been able to get their attention. And I think we should acknowledge the fact that, when the Democrats say that we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform, they're using these children, they're using these grieving families as leverage to get other political points they want in terms of amnesty programs or other immigration measures. That's not going to happen. That can't happen.
Just real quick. See that point right there? That was a low point that occurred at the end of the Trump administration because he took matters in his own hand because Congress wouldn't act to reform our asylum law. So you say Congress has, yeah, I think Congress should act. But a president can secure the border. President Trump did. By return to Mexico, the third safe country policies, other agreements with other countries. We were building the wall. Immigrants realized, or people trying to come to this country illegally, is we were serious about securing the borders, and they stopped coming. We pretty well stopped the flow of unaccompanied children, of family units exploiting our laws. We stopped it. It's because we had a president that was serious about securing the border. Unfortunately, we have a president in the office now that is not faithfully executing the law and literally is committed to an open border policy. And the results are obvious. The results are sickeningly obvious. And I just ask all of you in the press, would this be an ignored story? Because this is an ignored story. Would this be ignored if there was a Republican president in office during this point in time? I was down in Guatemala. I toured a facility, a safe house for sex-trafficked little girls. The youngest was 11. They had the cribs there for the little babies these sex-trafficked little girls were having. If you can't get angry about that, if you in the media can't get interested enough to report the truth, the depredations occurring, they have to be stopped outside of politics. There should be nothing political about this. We passed this Secure Fence Act on a bipartisan basis. I think 85 members of the Senate voted for it. And yet now, Democrats refuse to even build the wall that we've already bought and paid for. So a president who's serious about this can fix this problem. He can stop a lot of this trafficking. But we have a president right now in office who could care less. The current vice president was on my committee when we heard testimony about a child being sold for $81. She obviously could care less, and you can see the results.
Just to add to that, so in 2006, this body passed the Secure Fence Act with 80 votes. We all know that if you have a boat that's taken on water, you got to plug the hole, right? Building a barrier and a wall and making sure that we have a way to keep our borders safe is critically important. And the challenge that I really have as I've dug into this issue and really tried to learn is that back in 2006, everybody agreed on that. Of those 80 votes, do you know who voted for the Secure Fence Act? Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, and guess what? Joe Biden. They are being ruled by the extremes, and they're letting that cloud their vision and doing what's right. What's right is protecting this nation. You know, finish building barriers so that we can make sure that we know who comes here and when and how, so that we take back control, that American laws take back control, not lawlessness, not drug cartels. They're running shot here. They're the ones that are profiting. So I think we have to come to agreement that you got to start somewhere and you got to secure this country before you're able to deal with anything else, and that's just the truth.
Isn't it ironic that you're asking about passing an additional law as the solution when the administration won't enforce the existing law?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.